Thank you, Leslie Ellsworth, accept our invitation to join with this interview. This little, I don't like to say it's an interview. It's a knowledge exchange.
Yes.
All the life experience, professional experience, and knowledge that you have collected your life in a 4 years of journey as a young teenager coming from all the way Englee, Newfoundland to challengeable northern Manitoba, and establish yourself with many voluntary professional settings, Valley, INCO, many committees, northern and Winnipeg, in urban and remote settings, lots of experience in a field of first responders, community support, and witness and experience many acute trauma incident during last 40 amount of years, 33 amount of 34 years of professional setting in Valley. So thank you for your time commitment to our program. Your knowledge is very helping to our first responders who involved in getting this training. CIDP ATEP training, which we call Critical Incident Desensitization Process and Acute Trauma Training. The training attend and involve many first responders, community members, general public, highly at risk and involved with acute trauma incident. So I would like to know, Les, what brings you to Thompson, and a 17-year-old boy with his sister coming all the way from Newfoundland to Thompson, and what kept you attached to bond with this community?
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen, first of all, for having me this morning. Really appreciate that. My journey started, as you said, when I was 17 years old. When I was 16, my 18-year-old brother had been killed in the family truck. And it was a devastating effect, not only for me, but my whole family and the community. And that was my first experience with acute trauma, because at that time, we were all going through so much, and it's that few minutes, that few hours and few days that it really matters most. We can easily describe the physical damage, but this is mentally we're talking about and what needs to be looked after. So after that, I was finishing up my last year of high school. I graduated with an intent of going to university, and the trauma was so great, and because I didn't get the proper treatment mentally, I guess I kind of ran away. So I came to Thompson with my sister. Wasn't very long after I got here, I got on with the mining company. At that time was INCO, now it's Vale. Years later, they were bought in 2006 by Vale, a Brazilian company. And I quickly migrated to Health, Safety and Environment Committee, because I had a passion. I wanted people to come home after working all day to their families without injury, or definitely not, fatality. So it was only, I was age 20 while I was working in the mine industry, and I get a call from my uncle, and he came to visit me and said my dad had passed away tragically in a boating accident at 55 years old. So it was a second incident that really drove me to be involved in bringing people home. So I dedicated my whole life. I spent years and years of training, being first responder. I was on the mine rescue team. I was a firefighter at Valley. So anything that I could be involved in to help others, I was involved in. The big piece is missing is what you're talking about today. It was those programs that was not in existence back then. So I'm very pleased today to be here to talk to you about that. And how years later we got some of that, but not like you are presenting today.
Yeah. No, I think I very much agree with you. When we originally starting this program, I remember I talked to you. Accidentally, we met somewhere else on the fly. We were flying together from Winnipeg to Thompson many years ago, and I told you, we're going to do this type of program, And the program is not only focusing first responders but also helping anybody living day-to-day life with acute trauma incidents such as disasters, accident, personal injuries, life incident, crisis.
Right.
And by the time we were having this meeting, Thompson was hitting to a very bad spot with our crime and our trauma incident rate.
Right.
So I remember you and me, we had discussed this. That's the main reason that me and my team decide that your knowledge is very important to share with our professional first responders who get in this training.
Exactly, and I can elaborate here for a minute. You're absolutely right. It was not just the mining industry. As a community leader, and right now I'm on my 29th year as a co-op board director, so I've been on committees for a long time. And as you said earlier, I've served in Winnipeg on the Occupational Health Planning Board. I've been all over the place. But here's the thing that really brings me to mind the community. You mentioned crime. In my family, and I'll give you an example, I had a sister whose boyfriend who she was going to marry had been murdered here in Thompson many years ago. And I was running a control room in the refinery at INCO when I got that call. And I quickly came home and had to handle all that, and that was a traumatic experience. And let me just put really what that meant to me. My sister was pregnant for about 5 months pregnancy, and she slept between my wife and I every night till that baby was born because of the terror and the fear of being injured herself. So that was another piece within the community. And the other piece was I've had a number off the job and on the job that have committed suicide. And I've spoken at a number of suicide funerals. It's one of the hardest things to do. So my current daughter-in-law, who I didn't know at the time, her father had committed suicide at Valley. And I had to deal with all of that. And again, I wish I had the in-depth training that you're offering today that could have been applied to those, different situations that I had to deal with. So what you're doing here is critical to not only community, as you said, it's the mining industry, it's the police officers, the firefighters, it's the family that can get that training and desensitize and all of that we need as well. So I'm very excited about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you're bringing a wonderful explanation and self-reflection to this discussion. Of course, the biggest challenge is most of the time is when people facing to acute trauma incident, they block and stop their mind with this vivid memory, the vivid experience,
Right.
which won't let them to respond.
Correct.
And move forward from that experience. And people living that experience again occurring for 10, 20, 15 years their life. Right?
And I remember, this is a very important piece. When the night that my brother was killed, I was in another town at like an arcade playing a pinball machine with a childhood friend. And we're both on each side of the machine. And a girl came up and said, "Your brother was just killed." And I kept playing. And the other guy stopped and I said, "Why are you stopping?" And he said, "Les, you didn't hear what she said." So what did she say? And because of the impact, that second impact, what she said, I guess I froze. My mind closed right down. And when she repeated the second time and he reminded me, I ran about 4 kilometers, wouldn't take a ride from that arcade to the hospital. So those were critical moments, and exactly that blocking out that you're talking about happened to me personally. And it was hard to deal with for a long time.
So with your experience, 4 years, subject responding, witnessing, or personally victimizing many incidents within the community up north, and also your valley employees and valley population. I'm sure you have experienced many incidents personally and professionally. What's your observation, Les, what people experience in this community when they respond to this type of trauma incident?
That's a great question. You know, my mind was reflecting as you were asking that question. So let's talk about on the job first that people gets affected. Many of them never return to work because they haven't got the proper treatment. They can't deal with that environment. So let's say it's an underground environment, someone got killed in an explosion, it was their partner. If they're not given the proper treatment, they could end up on compensation for the rest of their life. We've had some of that. I had another person, for example, that lost his leg underground. He has never returned to work, not because he didn't get more training, but because he didn't have the mental piece dealt with. He couldn't get past it.
Yeah.
He couldn't get, even to this day, he can't get past it. So every time I see him, only actually last week I seen him, he gave me a big hug, and he's still suffering from that. In fact, he's leaving the community. Now, if you talk about in the community, I've also seen it where people have ended up in mental institutions because they couldn't deal with it. There's been marriage breakdowns. There's been financial ruin.
Yes.
So the list goes on and on. And so that's just, it doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the whole family if it's not treated in a timely manner. And now, you know, some cases now is years later. I recall just recently talking to a young man who was suffering from years later that still needs help. So it's not just on the job, it's off the job as well.
I think that's a very great subject point you had brought it out. Not only people witnessing to the incident and people living with them, their family members, like you said, right?
Right.
And maybe a co-worker, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Right? So, and getting plus co-workers, family members, that basically community.
Absolutely.
So automatically you're focusing to a community that affected by.
And one of the things that is a reminder to business, whether you're small or big, and I hate to say it, but it's a fact, it affects their profit margin. And what I'm getting at there is, if they had this training, you know, when they sought someone like you in your business to get it, and I had the frontline supervisors train, even I go down to the workers train in some cases, and they treat it, you know, right away, and they don't wait, then people, not that they get over it, they get a better understanding mentally, they get that treatment mentally, where they now can go out and be productive. What happens is, if that don't happen, people lose the will to work. They're not productive. And when they're not productive, there's another big scenario that happens. They become unsafe, not because they want to, but their mind is not on what they're doing. So the quicker that companies or even individuals gets training like you're offering, the better productive, safe workplace they will have.
So all the students watching this video in our training and our other programs, I discussed with Les about how the new acute trauma and desensitization and critical incident bilateral stimulation technique, how that works. So Les has a good idea about this, and also I discussed with him about traditional counseling, talking about incident again, many times, many people. Sometimes doesn't not really help because you're reliving with the incident.
Right.
And that is why the new science and new psychology subject has found an investigate this new way helping people without talking about the incident.
Right.
And by using a strong developed techniques such as bilateral stimulation, eye movement exercises. So, and I'll be honest, and I was very happy when I discussed with him about this knowledge with him, with his knowledge and his experience. He understands unbelievably what we bringing out, and also he made very clear point value that it is very important. It's time the community and professional to have this type of support, because as he mentioned, he also noticed that many professionals in a very young age leaving town, leaving their job due to vicarious trauma, the trauma they carry on their own life experience. So maybe you can a little bit talk about your professional experience, and if you like, bring maybe an example, professional burnout from their own tension and leaving.
You know, again, that's an excellent observation, and the one that comes to mind for me now in my current role as a city councillor, the turnover in our firefighters and ambulance drivers is unbelievable in northern Manitoba. We have the highest per capita by probably even double than any city, I would suggest, in Canada when it comes to ambulance calls and what they have to deal with. So if they're short, which they are most time, because people leave and we can't recruit fast enough, they are doing this 12, 16 hours steady every day, sometimes for weeks without a day off. So what ends up, they do indeed get burnt out. They don't have the techniques that they need to use when they're dealing with these people. So then they take it personal.
Yeah.
What if I could have done this? What if I could have done that? Whereas if you had those techniques applied, and one of the things, and you brought it out when you were talking about it, it's that eye contact. If you were dealing with someone and they're not making eye contact, chances are they're not listening. Once you make eye contact and you see the body movement, it's a similar technique that's used in negotiations. It's the same way.
I'd like to bring a little bit your knowledge and your insight to the responder training we're offering, the technique we're introducing to not only responders again, and I know this is something very much questioning about from us on a regular basis. It's open to anybody who living, witnessing to trauma. It's called emotional psychological CPR. We have a CPR to protect our body.
Right.
We have many things to protect our physical health.
Yes.
But emotional CPR, trauma CPR or psychological CPR, if not CIDP or ATEP, acute trauma responder training. Can you tell us a little bit what's your thinking of how this would help to our community generally?
Sure. First of all, I'm glad the analogy you used between the physical and the mental. There's a big difference. I'm a trained CPR person. So if you were fall on the floor, I would know how to conduct CPR when it comes to compressions and ventilation, all of that stuff easily because I'm trained in it. But if you get to the mental piece, I wouldn't have a clue if I didn't understand the training. So years ago, we used to have the critical incident, but that was basically you'd show up, you would talk to people, you'd comfort people, and that's as far as it would go. What you're offering is a lot in depth.
Yeah.
You're talking about the mental piece that needs the same kind of treatment as the physical piece. So if you think, and this
At
is the way
that
I
moment,
at very moment,
at that very moment,
right?
yeah.
Because what you're doing is, if it's on the physical, you're trying to save a life before the medical people get there. Well, this is no different.
Yeah.
If you do not get in there on the mental piece at the right timing, as I had said earlier in the discussion, you could see people in the mental institutions. You could see families broken down. You could see so many things happen. So that CPR, we're going to refer to it for the mental piece, is just so critical at that time that if it's not applied, it could affect that person, his whole family, the rest of their life.
Yeah, I think that's a very deep, strong explanation of why we need it, for what that bringing into our life. Speaking to you about some of your experience and one of the experience you brought out previously with our meeting. We have a meeting with this wonderful, valuable resource once in a while in our facility. He helped our program and he collaborate his knowledge and his his commitment with our team. So I remember you talk about that snowmobile experience.
Yes, that's
And would you maybe bring that and link to
absolutely.
this discussion?
I am so glad you brought that up. That is something that I personally have lived with for many, many years. So back about, I'm going to say maybe 8 years ago, I had got a call from my nephew and said, you know, would you like to go for a ride to Paint Lake, which is a local lake in northern Manitoba? And I said, absolutely. So I borrowed my son. I didn't have a sled at the time. I borrowed a sled and I met him and his friend. So we drove to Paint Lake on what they call the Nickel Trail, which is a room trail for snowmobiles. When we got to the marina, we stopped for breakfast, and they had said, "How are you enjoying your ride?" And I said, "Not very good." And they looked at me and said, "You're going too fast for this old guy." So I said, "When you go back," I said, "it's got to be slower." So we proceeded after breakfast to return to Thompson so when we got to the Nickel Trail, at the entrance, we stopped, and I said, "Take your time." Well, it was only about a minute and a half. These machines are fast. I come around a turn, and here was this guy landed up against a tree, and he's screaming in pain. So I'm the first responder now.
Yeah,
There is
you
nobody
become,
here.
yeah.
There is nobody here. I am miles away from anybody. My nephew was already gone because he was in front, so I'm here alone.
I'm not going to really disturb your talk, and one of the things our student need to observe with his explanation now is sometimes you're becoming a first responder without you liking or not.
Right.
So you don't have an option to be a first responder. The situation automatically letting you to be the first responder, like he mentioned. Please continue.
So I actually was pretty shaken up before I got off my machine. So I'm traveling to 30, 40 kilometers an hour, so I got to slow down real quick. And so I slow down and get off my machine, I take off my helmet, and I'm running towards this young man that's now screaming in so much pain. So the first thing I thought his neck might be broken. I have nothing to help me right now. So you got to improvise real quick. So I packed his neck with snow. Now he wasn't happy because that's not good. That's not a good comfortable thing. But I packed this, and then his leg was in bad shape, and I began to try to talk to him, encourage him, and tell him the help was on the way. And within minutes after, someone actually showed up that had some medical that could help us. But you know, that man, because of where we were, the extreme injury, ended up losing his leg. And I was at the hospital a week later in Winnipeg with his wife and his dad when they had to remove his leg. I had never forgotten, and you always think to yourself, was there something else I could have done? It took 2.5 hours for the emergency services in Thompson to respond to where we were. So it was a lot of time that had elapsed during that time. But mentally, I had talked to him the whole time till someone got there, and even after that. But you always, I wish I could have had that training where I could have done that much more. So you live with that for years later. So it's not just, so here we are talking this morning, it's not about being a supervisor, it's not about being a police officer, it's about being an individual that can get this training to apply it in a situation like that.
I think what he's really bringing, we are slowly getting to our last part of the interview. What he's really bringing to our student is, no matter where, how, when, you would be a responder, first responder, with or without your choice. The most psychological challenge in a first responder is dealing with that particular person in trauma, and the vivid experience, the traumatic experience that recalling again and again within that time frame. Most probably he might be living with panic or anxiety or any other mental state. So helping to deal with that vivid experience, vivid picture, vivid memory, or what any vividness during that period of time until paramedics or RCMP or whoever show up. Or maybe after that incident in extended of time, 3, 4, 5, 7 days, helping that person to manage that vivid difficulty is the most valuable thing, so that long-termly avoid person becoming and witnessing to serious chronic trauma and complex trauma. So northern Manitoba, as we all know, Thompson especially, suffering a lot of unresolved complex trauma. Most of those trauma is a result of acute trauma incident that did not support, treated well at that moment or within a short period of time. So that trauma becoming chronic and complex long-termly. So that trauma living with your iceberg, your bottom of your iceberg. We have a nice picture in our place we use a lot.
Yeah.
This is basically our mind, our life. It would live with your iceberg, very bottom of your iceberg, long-termly. So before we ending our interview, Les, anything you wanted to bring it out or say or close with the meeting?
Absolutely. We've talked about a number of stories and how the effects. I just want to elaborate really quickly on the last story. Because even though we didn't have the training, I know we could have done so much more. Not only myself, but others gathered around this young man. And he went from a laborer to a trade school and became a mechanic. And was able to because of this tremendous support. In fact, workers wanted to work his shifts so that his family would be supported during this ordeal. So there was a lot of family, community support. Yet, if we had had this training, wow, what could we have done, that much more? So my thing for this treatment that you're offering is, do not just limit it to experts, for example, paramedics, please, right down to the family member if they wish to take it, because it's important to everyone to understand. Because as you've said, whether you like it or not, you may be the responder, the first responder. It could be in the bush, it could be on a vacation somewhere, you're on a highland, you're out traveling, hiking. You could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you've got those critical minutes and hours that you tend to that loved one, that stranger, whoever it might be, will be critical to the path going forward so that they get better. And again, in closing, I'm honored. This is not work for me. I'm honored that you would ask me to come and share my experience. So thank you very much, Dr. Newland.
Thank you very much on behalf of Integrative Mindfulness Center team. We give in our great honor, thankfulness to support our student to learn something today. I hope all of you learned something today from his experience that integrated with CDI ATEP value of that training. And you have a wonderful day, and hope to maybe have another meeting in future so that you can share your more knowledge with our student.
Absolutely, thank you.
You're welcome.